Before the world was shaped into the lines we know today, before the Empire, before the Dragonborn, and the shouts of Thursday split the skies, there lived a people of such quiet grace and distant majesty that even their names have faded like frost beneath morning sun. They were the Snow Elves, not beasts, not monsters, not myths, but a proud, luminous race of mare, known in their own tongue as the Falmer, which once meant frozen ones or ice folk, depending on the dialect and the dream. In those elder days, long before Skyrim was called such, the land was ruled not by Nords or dragons, or even Isgrimor's sword, but by crystal towers and moonlit cities. The Snow Elves built sanctuaries atop frozen cliffs, with bridges that arched like starlight and halls carved into glacier walls, their interiors lit by slow-burning enchanted braziers and echoing with soft choral hymns to Oriel, the time dragon, whom they worshipped above all. They were not elves of war, not like their kin in Somerset or Morrowind. Theirs was a culture of stillness, of reflection, of reverence for the cold, which they did not merely endure but embraced. The snow was not their enemy. It was memory. It was silence. It was sacred. Their architecture did not clash with the land but whispered with it, the curves of their temples flowing like wind across tundra, the spires crowned with white, not to boast, but to disappear into the clouded sky. In these days, the Falmer lived in harmony with nature, drawing from the land without bending it to their will. They crafted spells that mimicked the falling of snow, summoned ice spirits as companions, and built monuments not for conquest but for contemplation. The ice did not trap them. It preserved them. The beauty of their society lay not just in stone or song, but in their philosophy. To the Falmer, the world was not meant to be tamed, but walked through slowly like a dream. They believed that cold was clarity, that warmth bred distraction. In the hush of winter, one could hear the echoes of divinity. And so they listened, always listened. Visitors, rare as they were, told stories of the Falmer's serene faces and silver-white eyes, of cities that shimmered under the aurora, and of oracles who could read the weave of time in the cracking of ice. It is said that once, in the city of sorrowful, the Snow Elves welcomed human settlers with cautious optimism, believing in the possibility of coexistence, even kinship. But dreams, even those made of ice and light, can shatter. In time, these noble elves would fall. But not yet. Here, in this opening stillness, before the curses and betrayals, the world was quiet, and the Falmer stood tall, radiant beings cloaked in frost and legend. They gazed out over the snow's cape, not with fear or loneliness, but with reverence. The white silence of their world was not empty. It was full of spirit. Though few remember them now, fewer still speak their true names, and even fewer can picture their faces without the corruption that came after. This chapter begins with memory, with the snowfall and the splendor of a people whose doom had not yet come. In the frost-kissed cradle of Skyrim's earliest age, under constellations older than history, the Snow Elves sang, and the wind listened. But all stillness carries with it the seed of motion. Beneath even the most ancient glaciers, ice creaks, shifts, and melts. And so it was with the peace of the Snow Elves. Though their temples glowed in quiet harmony and their songs drifted through mountain passes, change was seeping in, slowly but surely, like water under stone. From the south, across distant seas, and through the thick mists of early history, came the Atmerans, men from a harsher land, driven by survival and strength. Their world was not shaped by contemplation, but by fire and blood. When they arrived in Skyrim, the Atmerans brought with them their axes, their families, and their gods of war. They did not see the land as sacred. They saw it as promise. Open, fertile, ready to be taken. At first, the Snow Elves watched from their high towers and frostbitten sanctuaries. These new arrivals were strange, loud and coarse, quick to anger, quick to love. They warmed themselves by fire, not by memory. They spoke of shore, of battle and mead, and the glory of conquest. But the Snow Elves, for all their pride, were not immediately hostile. They remembered the old teachings, that all change must be listened to, for even storms carry truth. So when the first men built Sarthel, the Falmer did not attack. In fact, some among them even welcomed the idea of kinship, an experiment in coexistence. The city of Sarthel was granted space, allowed to grow, watched closely from the hills. It became a living question. Could two worlds, so unlike in thought and rhythm, truly share the same sky? But harmony, like crystal, fractures under pressure. Beneath Sarthel, unknown to the men who built it, and perhaps even to the elves who observed it, lay something old, something buried, a relic of deep time, ancient and immense. Later called the Eye of Magnus, this artifact pulsed with magic far beyond mortal comprehension. It whispered, perhaps not in words, but in dreams and urges. And something changed. The Atmarans grew more confident. Their numbers swelled, their settlements stretched, and the Snow Elves began to fear not the men themselves, but what they might awaken, what powers they might bend, what destruction they might cause. Some say it was fear that drove the elves to act. Others say arrogance. But in the shadow of Sarthel, the first blood was spilled. In what history would come to call the Night of Tears, the Snow Elves descended upon the city in fury and fire. Sarthel was destroyed. Men and mare alike were slain. Whatever understanding once flickered between the two peoples was drowned in violence and sorrow. But not all men died that night. Isgramor, a leader among the Atmarans, fled north with his sons, vowing vengeance. And with his return would come fire, war, and the beginning of the end for the Snow Elves. Yet even here, as the first storm clouds gathered over Skyrim's white peaks, the Falmer did not yet fall. Their towers still stood. Their faith in Oriel endured. But something ancient had cracked, and through that crack, darkness would slowly pour. The eye beneath Sarthel remained, silent and pulsing. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. In quiet corners of Falmer temples, oracles wept saltless tears. They saw visions not of harmony, but of hunger and betrayal. Their gods, once so distant and serene, now whispered of loss. The winds shifted colder than ever. Not the cold of clarity, but of absence, the hollow space left behind when something beautiful begins to die. This was the turning, the soft, nearly silent beginning of a long, slow fall. A shadow now lay beneath the ice. The Snow Elves could not yet see its full shape, but they felt it. And still, the snow continued to fall. The snows grew heavier in the years that followed the Night of Tears. Where once there had been watchful peace between Snow Elves and men, there was now only blood and retribution. The skies over Skyrim darkened with smoke as the Atmarans returned, not as guests, but as conquerors. Led by Isgramor and his 500 companions, the Nords swept across the land in wrathful vengeance. Falmer strongholds, once proud and gleaming atop cliffs and crags, fell one by one. Their temples were defiled, their knowledge burned, their sacred groves hewn down for war. And the Snow Elves, those who survived, began to fade into legend. But not all vanished into myth. Some fled, scattered to the remotest corners of Skyrim. Yet one group, cornered and desperate, made a different choice. They turned not to the mountains for hiding, nor to their gods for salvation. They turned downward, into the depths of Nirn. There, beneath the mountains, lay the great subterranean kingdoms of the Dwemer, the Deep Elves. Mysterious, brilliant, and secretive, the Dwemer did not share the Falmer's faith in gods or in prophecy. They prized reason above ritual, knowledge above dogma. And in their vast, humming cities of brass and stone, the Dwemer had long lived apart from the surface, watching the conflicts above with cold detachment. To them came the refugees, Snow Elves broken by war, pleading for sanctuary. They brought no armies, no pride, only hunger, fear, and the memory of a lost world. It is said that the Dwemer did not answer with pity, but with calculation. Perhaps they saw in the Falmer an opportunity, a tool. Or perhaps it was simple curiosity that moved them. Whatever the reason, a bargain was struck. The Snow Elves would be given shelter in the deepest reaches of the Dwemer cities. In return, they would partake of a special nourishment, a substance crafted by Dwemer alchemy, sustenance for their survival. It was a silent poison, The glowing fungus, rich in nutrients but laced with subtle toxins, slowly robbed the Falmer of their vision. Day by day, moon by moon, their eyes dimmed, until even the faintest trace of light became agony. Soon, they were blind. Entire generations born into darkness, raised in shadow. And in that darkness, something began to change, not just in their bodies, but in their minds. At first, the Falmer believed this was a test, a trial from Oriel to cleanse them of arrogance. They whispered prayers in the caverns, carved hymns into the rock, but the gods did not answer, only silence. As the years turned into centuries, the Falmer's stories changed. No longer did they speak of a radiant past. Instead, they whispered of betrayal, by gods, by kin, by the light itself. They became bitter, twisted by memory and isolation. The Dwemer, always cold and precise, allowed them to serve, first as guests, then as laborers, and finally as slaves. What had begun as refuge became a prison, and in the heart of that prison, the Falmer transformed. The glow of fungus became their sky. The drip of caverns became their music. Their skin grew pale, translucent. Their forms hunched, warped by toil and time. And though blind, their other senses sharpened beyond comprehension. They became hunters in the dark, quiet as breath, deadly as frostbite. But worse than their physical change was what festered inside, the hatred. A deep, endless well of it. Against the Dwemer who had caged them. Against the Nords who had driven them underground. Against the gods who had abandoned them. Against light itself. No longer were they the Snow Elves. They were becoming something else. They had no name for this state. Not yet. No word could fully encompass what it meant to lose not just one's home or body, but one's very place in the weave of the world. But deep within, the transformation had begun. And in the cold, echoing chambers of Dwemer halls, the whispers of betrayal mingled with the clank of metal and steam. The Falmer, though they could not see, would never forget. The years turned silently in the deep, unmeasured by sun or moon. In the hollow world beneath Nirn, where warmth was drawn not from stars but from the slow breath of the earth itself, the Falmer endured. They no longer counted the days, nor marked the seasons. The rhythms of their lives were dictated not by sky or harvest, but by the tolling mechanisms of Dwemer gears, by the echoing shifts of subterranean tides, by the ever-present hum of machinery. They were no longer Snow Elves. That name belonged to another age, to another species. Their transformation was not abrupt. It was glacial, almost imperceptible. But over centuries, change became permanence. Their eyes, once capable of perceiving the dance of auroras and the distant shimmer of stars, were now milky or sunken or absent altogether. Yet with the loss of sight came other senses sharpened to impossible acuity. Vibrations in stone told them of movement. Whispers in stale air spoke of direction. Sense clinging to damp walls sang of prey and predator alike. They had adapted, but at a cost deeper than form. Their minds, once sculptors of poetry and art, priests of celestial truths and lore, had grown twisted by resentment and hunger. The beauty of their language faded. Their songs turned to hisses. Their thoughts turned ever inward, insular and circular, spiraling into instinct and pain. Generations raised in slavery knew no other world. They were not taught to remember. They were taught to obey. And the Dwemer? They did not teach or offer care. They experimented. The Falmer were subjects as much as servants. Their masters had long abandoned any illusion of partnership. The once proud refugees were now tools, disposable, replaceable, barely acknowledged. It is not known what horrors were conducted in those forgotten vaults. Some ancient ruins, long buried, still hold twisted relics. Skeletal remains fused with metal, blind warriors bound to strange harnesses, and whispering glyphs written in a tongue both Falmerian and alien. These were not merely slaves. These were test beds for Dwemer design. The Snow Elves, in the end, were not protected by Dwemer shelter. They were reshaped by Dwemer will. But the Dwemer, for all their cunning and arcane might, were not eternal. One day, with no warning, no omen, and no thunder, they vanished. It happened in an instant, according to later accounts. All across Nirn, from the halls of Skyrim to the volcanic pits of Vardenfell, the Dwemer were simply gone. Their machines slowed, but did not stop. Their halls fell silent, but remained intact. Their secrets were left behind, but their bodies were not. They had attempted to breach some final threshold of understanding, and in doing so, severed their own ties to the Mundus. The Falmer were abandoned, again. But this time they did not mourn. There were no tears for their vanished captors, no prayers, no vigils. Only silence, and then a scream. It echoed through Blackreach like a prophecy, raw, wordless, guttural. It was the cry of something ancient being born anew. The Falmer, free from chains but bound by habit, did not return to what they were. They could not. Too much had been lost. Too much had been distorted. And in the vacuum left by the Dwemer, they expanded. They claimed the empty cities, not with celebration, but with slow, creeping reclamation. They moved through the tunnels and workshops, blind but sure, like veins of frost spreading through forgotten stone. They took up weapons, crude at first, then cunning. They developed crude alchemy, poisons that could rot flesh in moments, drawn from fumble life long, made familiar. They crafted traps, simple snares at first, then elaborate horrors made from salvaged brass and bone. They multiplied, hidden and countless. Their society, if it could still be called such, was not built on law or order or learning, but on survival, territory, and instinct. Tribes formed. Clans competed. Some retained fragments of language. Others relied on gesture, on scent, on echo. All were united by blindness, by loss, and by rage. And they remembered. Though none alive had ever seen the sun, some echo of ancestral memory still burned in them. A hatred, like an ember, passed down through bone and blood. A knowledge that above them walked others. The bright ones, the light-born, the unscarred. And so the Falmer waited. Not as victims, not as mourners, but as predators in the dark. Above, the Nords built cities and kingdoms, forgetting the names of the people they had once called foe. They told tales of Snow Elves as if speaking of myths, not realizing that their descendants had become monsters in the void below their feet. The Falmer were not gone. They were simply beneath, watching, listening, preparing. And though they had no eyes, they had not lost sight of vengeance. Above ground, in the colder reaches of Skyrim and the haunted valleys of the Velothine Mountains, there were stories. Tales told around hearths on storm-lashed nights, passed from elder to child with a tone of solemn caution. They spoke of twisted things that lived in the caves, pale and eyeless, who moved without sound and struck with poison. Children knew them only as ice goblins or bog devils. The old ones gave them darker names, silent ones, deep stalkers, or simply the forgotten. These stories were warnings, not history. They were meant to keep wanderers from entering deep caverns, to frighten children from straying too far into the dark. And, like most folk tales, they were rooted in truth that had long since been buried beneath fear and distortion. For the Falmer were not myths. They were still there, still breeding, still lurking, still learning, still seething. The Nord Jarls and scholars, if they ever spoke of the Snow Elves at all, spoke of them as a long-vanished people, destroyed in ancient wars or fated in a legend. Their ruins, if uncovered, were misattributed. Their weapons, if discovered, were seen as curiosities, relics of some unknown race. No one imagined they were still alive, that in the very mountain foundations below thriving cities, entire civilizations persisted, twisted, yes, but active. The Falmer had become subterranean ghosts in the minds of men. Yet their claws still scratched stone. Their breath still fogged stale air. It was in these years of blind ignorance that the Falmer began to creep upward again, not in armies, not in declarations of war, but in probes and whispers. Travelers near certain caverns began to vanish. Miners heard strange noises, clicks and shrieks echoing from depths they dare not plumb. Hunters found deer carcasses with clean wounds, but no predator tracks. And always, when they went looking, they found nothing but darkness. But beneath the surface, there was order. Some clans of Falmer had grown powerful. They had hierarchies now, priest kings and war leaders, or the Falmeri equivalent. Elders with the deepest scars and memories passed down tales of the surface world, of the great betrayal, of the snow and the stars, and the warm light that had once graced their ancestors. To them, the surface was not a curiosity. It was stolen, a place that had been taken from them and defiled. And so, rituals began, not religious in the way mortals above would understand them, but ceremonial nonetheless. Offerings of poisoned shorus ichor, dances and silent rhythms around ancient Dwemer cores, sharpenings of blades before carved murals of elven figures with burning eyes. They prepared, not for war, but for return. In some rare cases, Falmer scouts even reached the surface. They observed from shadows, clinging to the mouths of caves, or peering from ruin cracks hidden beneath the snow. These few who touched moonlight often went mad, or hungered more deeply than before. They brought back wordless impressions of wind, of stars, of laughter. Concepts alien and painful. Their hatred deepened, their resolve hardened. Occasionally, their presence slipped past the veil of myth. A caravan would vanish along a mountain pass, found days later torn apart with no tracks in the snow. A hold's livestock would disappear overnight, only a strange residue left behind. A child would speak of voices coming from the well, voices no one else could hear. These tales were dismissed: wolves, bandits, frost trolls. Anything but what truly haunted the deep. Some ancient texts, however, began to surface. A few scholars in Winterhold, in their crumbling towers, puzzled over recovered Dwemer artifacts and noted strange recurring symbols, glyphs that didn't match Dwemer tongue, yet appeared in regular intervals. They spoke of a symbiotic race, a subject people, mentioned rarely and without name, a servant caste, a test species. Questions were asked. Connections were drawn. Still, few believed. It was not until the late Third Era, when a thieves' guild stumbled upon a tunnel network beneath Markarth that spiraled far deeper than expected, that true evidence began to reach the surface. The tunnels bore signs of habitation, not by beast, but by intelligence. Simple shrines, traps of bone and brass. And then the bodies. Not human, not mare. Pale things with collapsed features, claws, and milky eyes. Their presence was undeniable. Their aggression immediate. The guild's report never reached the Jarl. Their contact vanished, but the rumors lingered. And so the myths continued, though their shapes subtly changed. Where once they were mere monsters, now they were ancient and betrayed. Where once they were primitive goblins, now they were fallen elves, cursed but cunning. Something deeper than just terror began to settle into the minds of those who listened closely to the old tales. Pity, perhaps, or horror of a different kind. For what was worse, being hunted by a beast or by something that once was kin? In this chapter of Tamriel's long memory, the Falmer walked the edge of nightmare and history. They remained in the dark, but no longer wholly hidden. Their myths, like them, were changing, growing sharper, more intelligent, more real. And all the while, their numbers swelled. The blind ones had not forgotten the snow. They would see it again, even if they could no longer see. Far below the surface of Skyrim, beyond the reach of torchlight, beneath the foundations of ancient Nordic barrows and the bones of forgotten wars, there stretches a vast, winding labyrinth. The deep roads, the Blackreach caverns, and the hidden arteries of the Dwemer legacy. In this silent, endless dark, the Falmer endure. No sun, no stars, only stone and memory. These underground realms, once vibrant with the hum of Dwemer machinery and the orderly industry of steam-driven marvels, now pulse with different rhythms. The glow of crimson fungi and eerie blue lichen lights the gloom in faint patches. Great caverns echo with the fluttering of shorus wings, and thin shrieks pierce the dark like distant bells. The very air seems aware, steeped in tension, watching, waiting. This is the empire of the forgotten. It is no unified realm. The Falmer do not rule, as the Dwemer once did. Rather, their society is tribal, scattered, nomadic, yet bound by a collective history of pain and an instinctive loyalty to their kind. They are not chaotic savages, as once believed. Their migrations through the subterranean world follow ancient paths. Their cities, if they may be called such, are grown rather than built. Structures of bone, chitin, and salvaged Dwemer metal fuse into spires and dens that twist like insect hives. Hierarchy exists. The strongest lead, elders marked by the most grievous scars, or those closest to the lore passed down in whispers and ritual. Memory is sacred. Every Falmer knows, even if they cannot speak of it in words, they were wronged, betrayed, blinded. This collective wound pulses at the heart of their culture. Their society is shaped by survival and vengeance, not aesthetics or conquest. Still, there is organization. Hunters patrol the deep, silent, and precise, accompanied by domesticated chorus, feral beasts now selectively bred and spiritually bonded to their masters. Scavengers comb the ruins for scraps of metal, salvaging centuries-old Dwemer detritus to craft cruel, barbed weapons. Priests or shamans lead rituals before glyph-covered stones, performing slow dances and chants remembered more by movement than by language. And at the deepest nodes, where light never falls, matriarchs brood, guarded by elite warriors with armor grown from shore scale and bone. Even in blindness, their senses are refined beyond mortal understanding. They see, through vibration, scent, the subtlest echoes of sound and air. Some speculate they even perceive memories embedded in stone or vibrations left behind by thought. Whether this is true or mythic exaggeration, none who have encountered them live long enough to explain. In truth, the Falmer have adapted to their dark world in ways that defy surface logic. Their language is musical, composed of clicks, hums, and rhythmic beats made with claws or staff taps. It echoes across tunnels like an alien bird song, eerie but precise. It is not spoken, it is performed. This symphonic communication allows tribes to signal across miles, coordinate migrations, or warn of intruders without ever breaking stealth. More haunting still are their murals. In some hidden chambers, scholars have found strange carvings and frescoes, twisted depictions of snow elves with burning eyes, of great fires and falling stars, of tall dwarves wielding chains of light. These glyphs, layered over time, depict not just history but dreams, rage, and grief. The Falmer may be blind, but they carve their memory in stone, feeling each curve, recalling each tale through touch. And still, deeper truths fester. It is whispered among certain elder Falmer that not all their kind were blinded, that somewhere in vaults untouched even by them, pure-blooded snow elves still live, either in stasis, in secrecy, or in exile. To the few who dare dream, this is a hope. To others, it is heresy. The notion that the betrayal was not total, that some escaped their fate, complicates the clarity of their hate. Yet if such can exist, they do not seek reunion. The Falmer that roam today are not looking to return to the surface in triumph or in peace. Their minds have been shaped by darkness, their hearts hardened by suffering. They are no longer snow elves, they are something else entirely. Something that remembers pain in its bones and vengeance in its breath. Above ground, most of Skyrim remains unaware. A few scholars in the College of Winterhold have begun to take note, collecting oral tales, tracking disappearances, mapping the ley lines of ancient Dwemer ruins. But they face ridicule. Who would believe in a secret race of blind elves prowling beneath their feet? Who would dare descend deep enough to verify it? The few adventurers who try rarely return. And those who do are broken, eyes haunted, voices soft, often refusing to speak of what they saw. The college keeps records of these encounters, locked in dusty archives under layers of myth and denial. Meanwhile, the Falmer endure, multiplying in their darkness, sharpening blades, tuning their songs. They know the names of the cities above, Windhelm, Solitude, Whiterun. They remember the stars. They hear the tremors of distant battles echoing through the stone. They know the world above has forgotten them, but they have not forgotten the world. One day, the stone will split, the roots will rise, and the surface will remember too late. In the cold twilight of a vanishing age, when snow still kissed the temples of the last true Snow Elves and the mountains of Skyrim whispered secrets only the wind could hear, there came a choice. A bargain, not forged in trust, nor born of mutual respect, but in desperation, in shadow, and in the failing breath of a people retreating before the storm of mankind. The once proud Falmer, weakened by centuries of retreat and bloodshed, found themselves hunted nearly to extinction. The rise of the Nordic peoples from Atmara had swept across Skyrim like a tidal wave, ferocious and unrelenting. Ancient temples had fallen. Songs once sung beneath auroras were silenced. The Falmer, though steeped in ancient wisdom and grace, were no longer the guardians of their homeland. They were exiles in their own land, hunted, wounded, scattered. In this darkness, they turned to an unlikely savior, the Dwemer. The Dwemer, or Deep Elves, were builders of miracles. Where the Falmer sculpted beauty in crystal and ice, the Dwemer etched logic into stone and fire. Their cities were engines of metal and steam, humming with arcane technology and silent order. Beneath Skyrim, their sprawling subterranean complexes formed a world apart, cold, alien, but vast and untouched by the wars raging above. It was into these halls that the Falmer came, weary and desperate. What followed was not a negotiation, but a submission. According to fractured legends, some carve in half-destroyed ruins, others whispered in forgotten corners of the Velothine Mountains. The Falmer offered themselves to the Dwemer in exchange for sanctuary. It was not merely shelter they sought, but survival. In the deepest ruins of Alftand, in Schuenzel, and Zulft, the Dwemer welcomed their kin. But their generosity, if it could be called that, came with conditions. The Dwemer feared the Falmer would betray them, or perhaps they saw in their desperation a perfect opportunity. The Falmer were made to consume a fungus, once rare, then cultivated, said to thrive in the deepest, lightless parts of Blackreach. It nourished, yes, but it did more than sustain. The fungus was laced with a subtle alchemy, a slow curse woven by the Dwemer's cruel brilliance. Over time, those who consumed it began to lose their sight, not to fire or blade, but to darkness from within. Sight faded, and with it, sanity. But the Falmer were not told. The blindness crept in over generations, gradual and cruel. At first, it was blamed on the dark, on the unnatural silence of the deep or the weariness of exile. But soon, too many were affected, and by the time they understood the cause, it was too late. The betrayal was total. Some resisted. Rebellion sparked in forgotten corners of the Dwemer cities. Falmer warriors rose up with blind fury, seeking to strike down their captors. But they were no match for the machine-born legions of the Deep Elves. Reprisals were swift, merciless. The rebellious were hunted, dissected, and displayed, reminders to the rest. Others accepted the blindness as penance, or as a strange passage into a new way of being. Their songs changed. Their rituals grew darker. They stopped calling themselves Snow Elves. They became something else, shaped by hunger, shadow, and a desire for vengeance smoldering like a buried flame. The Dwemer kept them as servants. Slaves, more truly, used to toil, to test, to maintain the lowest halls of their great cities. To the Dwemer, it was an efficient arrangement, one that served both necessity and cruelty. To the Falmer, it was degradation. Generation by generation, memory faded. History became myth, then rage, and then silence. One day, without warning, the Dwemer vanished. Not just from Skyrim, but from Nirn itself. Their cities remained. Their automatons marched on in endless routines, but the Deep Elves were gone, erased, and in the vacuum, the Falmer remained. They rose from servitude into inheritance. The tools of their masters became weapons. The halls that once imprisoned them became homes, temples, breeding pits, hives. Their society, warped by centuries of poison, suffering, and loss, took form around the ruins of Dwemer arrogance. Some believe the Falmer see the Dwemer not just as betrayers, but as gods to overthrow, a twisted pantheon of blinding tormentors whose bones are now rust and echo. Others claim the Falmer learned more than suffering, that they absorbed fragments of Dwemer knowledge, reshaping it in ways far stranger than surface scholars can imagine. And yet, through it all, a question lingers. Why did the Falmer trust the Dwemer at all? Some say they had no choice, that the world above was lost, and that any hope, even poisoned, was better than none. Others suggest that there were factions, even then, that some Falmer knew of the cost and warned against it. But in the desperation of exile, unity was impossible, and the Dwemer offered what no one else would: a place, a promise, a cruel salvation. In the end, it was not merely a bargain, but a surrender of fate. The Falmer entered the deep as Snow Elves. They would not return as such. In the cavernous dark where torchlight could not reach, where sound bent strangely in silence at weight, the Falmer began to realize they were no longer who they had been. But neither were they yet lost. Blinded by the Dwemer's poison gift, their vision faded, but within them, other senses stirred. What was once a world of light became a world of vibration, scent, and sound. And in that strange, oppressive dark, something old and fierce refused to die. The loss of sight might have broken another people, but the Snow Elves, now fading into Falmer, were not so easily extinguished. Sightless, They began to navigate with eerie precision, learning the texture of stone with their fingers, the direction of motion through the hum of tunnels. They adapted. They learned. They survived. The Dwemer saw only compliance in their blind captives. They assumed the blinding spores had dulled them beyond threat, made them mute, malleable, mindless. They were wrong. The Falmer, stripped of their senses and dignity, still harbored memory. Memory of their crystalline cities, of snowfields kissed by starlight, of shrines to Oriel and ancient songs that once echoed across frozen spires. Though they could no longer see the stars, they remembered what they had looked like. And in the hollow dark of the Dwemer's underworld, they whispered those stars back into existence with every word passed in secret. Each step they took without sight became a declaration of endurance. Each adaptation, be it echolocation through subtle clicks or tracing air currents for unseen movement, was a reclaiming of will. And though their minds frayed under the pressure of captivity and chemical suppression, not all were lost. Some became leaders in silence. Elders among them began to map the darkness not with charts, but with rhythm, ritual, and breath. They created their own language anew. Not the elegant script of the old Snow Elf texts, but a raw, hissing speech suited to echoing off walls and communicating without light. What they built in secret was not a kingdom, but a culture born of necessity, grief, and ironclad resilience. To be blind was no longer to be broken. It was transformation, and in that transformation, something terrible and enduring was born. Yet with every decade, their forms twisted further, bodies changing to better suit the underground world. Bones bent, skin paled, eyes sealed shut. What emerged was not entirely Snow Elf, not entirely monster. But between those extremes was a creature shaped by cruelty and empowered by pain. Still, despite the horror of their evolution, a strange nobility remained. They were no longer what the world had called them, but they were not yet beasts. They remembered, and in remembering, they endured. The Dwemer, in their arrogance, believed they had broken them, but they had only cast them into a deeper forge. The Falmer, though blind, were not broken. In the endless twilight beneath Nirn's crust, the Falmer began to change. Their eyes, now useless, closed forever. The world around them became a symphony of sounds, scents, and subtle tremors in the stone. Footsteps echoed like thunder across dwarven halls. The drip of subterranean springs was as familiar as a lover's voice. Every vibration, every shift of air, became a signal, a thread in the dark tapestry of their new lives. They were no longer Snow Elves, but they were not yet monsters. For a time, the Falmer endured in silence. The Dwemer cared little for their suffering, seeing them only as tools, servants, or pests. But within the blind, pale ranks of the fallen people, memory lingered. Songs were still hummed in solitude, ancient names spoken beneath breath. The stories of Oriel and the light of the sun were whispered from parent to child, even as the words became hushed and twisted. In the deepest chambers of Blackreach, far from Dwemer eyes, some among the Falmer began to gather. Elders with sharpened hearing, shamans who claimed to dream in colors they could no longer see, and warriors who moved like ghosts in the dark. These were the ones who remembered most. They told tales around cold fires made of glowing fungus and chanted in voices hoarse with old grief. The Falmer began to map the world by touch and sound. They carved crude runes into stone walls to guide their steps. They built hidden enclaves within the ruins, tucked away places where their kind could gather without Dwemer knowledge. And there, they whispered, not just prayers or memories, but plans. They began to question. Why were they still enslaved? Why should they accept their fate? There were legends of those who tried to escape, those who were caught and punished, their fates worse than death. Yet the seeds of rebellion were planted, and they grew like mushrooms in the dark, silent, spreading, patient. It was in these years that their language changed. Once melodic and flowing like the sea over ice, now it became guttural, soft clicking, coated in rhythm and breath. Their voices no longer reached the sky, but instead coiled low, hidden, secret. New leaders arose, not kings but war sages, figures who claimed to speak for the forgotten gods of the deep. They were not priests of Oriel. They were dreamers, visionaries, and madmen who heard the echoes of dead stars through the bones of the world. One such figure, whose name is lost to time, was said to walk barefoot across razor stone without harm and weep for every Falmer's soul still in chains. The Dwemer noticed something changing. Their servants grew quieter, more coordinated. Accidents began to occur. A forge would collapse. A lift would fail. Tools would vanish. The Falmer had begun their war, not with blades or open revolt, but with patience and precision, like a slow tide wearing away stone. And in the corners of Blackreach, the Dwemer engineers would sometimes speak of strange songs in the tunnels. Songs in a language they did not know. Songs that should not be possible in so deep a place. The Falmer were no longer merely survivors. They were listening, they were learning, and they were waiting. Waiting for a moment. Waiting for a crack in the stone. Waiting for the silence between heartbeats when the world forgets to look. In that breathless dark, something stirred. Not just a rebellion, but a transformation. A people abandoned by gods and betrayed by kin, forging identity not from light, but from loss. They had become whispers in the deep. But whispers can rise into screams. And in the shadow of stone and steel, the Falmer would not be silent forever. It began not with fanfare or fire, but with absence. A Dwemer engineer went missing during routine maintenance of the lower lifts. No one noticed at first. A slip, perhaps. A fall into one of the many endless pits below. Such things happened. But then another vanished. And another. Always in the same pattern. Deep workers, those stationed furthest from the great forges and central towers. Always during the quiet hours, when machines hummed and the sound of turning gears masked softer things. The Falmer called it the thinning, when the veil between their servitude and their uprising grew ever more delicate. At first, the Dwemer suspected mechanical failure or simple misfortune. Their minds, tuned to logic and precision, could not conceive of rebellion from the blind and broken. They had spent too long looking through the Falmer rather than at them. They didn't see the ghosts forming in the dark. The Falmer moved in absolute silence, their footsteps echoing as faint suggestions of motion in tunnels too large for their bent forms. They had learned the patterns of the Dwemer, the rhythms of guards, the timings of gear rotations, the very breath of the machines. They struck only when the shadows were deepest, and left behind nothing but the smell of old metal and vanishing footprints. They were not an army. Not yet. They were a myth, whispered in Dwemer halls, spoken only in ironclad rooms and dismissed as superstition. But among the Falmer, it was no myth. It was a reckoning. Each captured tool, each stolen schematic, each killed overseer was a verse in the song of their return. And yet, this was not freedom. Not yet. For every successful strike, 10 more Falmer were culled. Families disappeared. Tunnels were collapsed deliberately. Those suspected of conspiring with air, as the Dwemer called it, were dragged away for reconditioning, a process never spoken of, even in whispers. Still, the rebellion spread. Cells began to form, loose collectives of rebels bound not by birth, but by belief. They met in drowned caverns lit by phosphorescent moss, trading scraps of knowledge and faith. They did not speak of victory. That was too far, too bold, too bright. They spoke instead of memory, of the old snows of the sun, of the taste of fresh air. Their leaders began to take names again. Not true names, those were sacred and hidden, but battle names, tunnel names. There was Ashmouth, who painted his teeth black to frighten his enemies. Bonehearer, who claimed to speak with those Falmer long dead. Whisperleaf, who walked unseen between Dwemer patrols, leaving only broken valves in her wake. It was not coordinated. It was not strategic, but it was alive, and the Dwemer began to fear. They responded as only the Dwemer could, with machines. Automata were sent into the deeps, heartless and tireless. Bronze spiders, whirring spheres, and lumbering constructs patrolled the halls where Falmer had once crept silently. The stone began to echo with new sounds, the click and hiss of oil and steam, the ever-turning vigilance of soulless watchers. But even then, the Falmer adapted. They learned the vulnerabilities of gears and joints. They tracked vibrations through their feet and hands, feeling the subtle shift in temperature when metal approached. They became ghosts among ghosts, slipping through a world designed to hold them. And then, in a year lost to memory, something broke. A central forge was overtaken. Just for a moment. A full rotation of Nirn, perhaps less. But it happened. Falmer banners, crudely woven from skin and mold, were hung for the rafters of a Dwemer sanctum. Fires were lit. Songs were sung, if only for an hour. By the time Dwemer reinforcements arrived, the forge was empty. Only smoke and silence remained. But the message was burned into every gear and bolt. The Falmer had risen, and they would not kneel again. The rebellion was no longer a rumor. It breathed. It bled. The Dwemer, for all their cold logic and mechanized intellect, could not deny what their automata reported. Sabotage, assassinations, entire forges left in silence and ash. What was once dismissed as myth was now codified in reports, inked in meticulous script and filed in obsidian-bound tomes. The Falmer uprising had begun in earnest, but something else stirred beneath the chaos. Something deeper than blades and broken gears. Something that no council of tonal architects could quantify, no schematic could contain. A curse, some whispered, or perhaps a prophecy come due. It lingered like rot in the stone, an intangible decay. The Dwemer doubled their efforts. Their retribution was swift and without nuance. Deep warrens were flooded with molten brass. Old tunnels collapsed under detonated keystones. Entire sectors of labor populations, Falmer, blind and silent, were erased from ledgers with impersonal precision. But the more the Dwemer destroyed, the stronger the Falmer became. Not in numbers, but in purpose. The act of survival had become a scripture, a ritual. Every torch extinguished, every tunnel reclaimed, was a line added to their growing myth. And yet, the rebellion was not their salvation. Not entirely. There was something else waiting, something darker. It began with the water. In the deepest wells, where even the automata feared to descend, the Falmer found it. A slow-dripping spring of thick, iridescent fluid, humming with unnatural energy. Those who touched it spoke of visions, of snowfields lit by moons unseen, of gods wearing masks of ash and glass. Others screamed and never stopped. They called it the echo of winter. But it was no echo. It was the seed of something ancient, and it would bloom in poison. The Falmer who drank from it changed. Not instantly, not visibly. At first, they simply moved with greater clarity, their blindness sharpening, their hearing becoming near precognitive. They could feel footsteps from miles away, hear the breath of spiders in walls. It was power, yes, but it came at a cost. Their minds frayed at the edges. Some began to forget their names, even their rage. Others became erratic, muttering phrases in languages no Falmer had ever spoken or heard. They began marking the walls of their tunnels with twisting glyphs, shapes that shimmered when seen at angles. The curse had taken root. Still, the rebellion burned on. The Dwemer had grown desperate. Their war machines were no longer enough. So they turned to experiments long thought too dangerous. Tonal distortions, forced memory wipes, neural sound weaving. They built devices that could erase thought, and they used them. Entire clans of Falmer were dragged into hollow chambers of light and noise. What emerged was not alive in the way they had been. They obeyed, yes, but not out of fear or loyalty, out of vacancy. They no longer remembered the sun, the snow, or the language of ice. These were the deepened, empty, perfect slaves. It was the final betrayal, not merely the theft of sight or freedom, but of being. The rebellion lost many of its own to this fate, and those who remained began to splinter. Some, like Whisper Leaf, vanished entirely, seeking some higher answer in the echo wells. Others grew more violent, more reckless. The Falmer were breaking, not from without, but from within, and so the war turned strange. Tunnels became haunted with spectral voices. Machines moved on their own. Forges lit themselves. There were reports of Dwemer found dead with their eyes open, mouths filled with frost, though the forges burned around them. Even the deepened began to act oddly, pausing in mid-stride, whispering to walls. The Dwemer, proud and atheistic, began to speak, in secret, of curses. But it was not a curse. It was consequence. The rebellion had never been just a battle for freedom. It was a confrontation with the very heart of betrayal, a wound in the world that had never closed. from the moment the Falmer sought shelter to the moment the Dwemer handed them a poison disguised as salvation. And that wound now festered. Beneath the ground, in the roots of Nirn, something ancient stirred, and the price had yet to be paid. They were once elves, slender, curious, proud. Snowborn, star-kissed, voices lifted in songs that carried across frozen cliffs and moonlit tundra. But what emerged from the Dwemer laboratories, from the cruel chasms beneath Blackreach, were no longer kin to that legacy. These were no longer Falmer. They were the Deepened, twisted not by rage, but by forgetting. The first of them had names, names that echoed in the tunnels, etched by comrades into stone as a warning, or perhaps a lament. But soon, even names lost meaning. Identity eroded like sandstone under storm. They did not remember the surface. They did not remember why they fought. They obeyed not out of loyalty, but out of emptiness. Their minds scraped clean by tonal machines designed to edit thought itself. They walked with hunched forms, arms longer than they should be, and pale skin stretched tight over bones. Their eyes, already blind, now bulged, vestigial and useless. Their hearing sharpened so intensely they could hunt by the sound of breath, the scrape of a toe on stone. And their mouths never closed. They whispered things that should not be known. Echoes of the Dwemer tongue, laced with something older, colder. They were weapons, but not stable ones. The Dwemer saw this too late. The tonal harmonics used to control them began to fail. The Deepened, in their empty minds, had found something else to follow, a rhythm not of mortal design. Something that pulsed through the earth. Not music, not speech. A humming, like wind through ice that never melts. It began subtly. One Deepened refused to obey. Then another wandered off during a campaign. Machines failed to track them. Traps were ignored. They began to move in patterns, spirals, circling tunnels in odd sequences. Some tore their flesh to make markings on walls. These were not random. The shapes repeated, always curved, always turning inward. The Falmers, still free, still fighting, began to fear their own kin. To the surviving rebels, those few who had not been taken, not been broken, the Deepened were worse than enemies. They were what they feared becoming. One drop of wrong water, one breath near the wrong machine, and any of them could be lost. Entire cells vanished into the dark. No battle, no sounds, just silence. And when scouts returned, they found bones gnawed and arranged in circles. Words carved upside down. It was as if the Deepened worshipped something. And perhaps they did. Legends among the surviving Falmer began to circulate. Tales of a hidden chorus, a voice beneath the world calling to the lost. They said the Deepened heard it first, that their blindness made them perfect vessels. And the more they forgot who they were, the closer they came to understanding it. Whatever it was, the Dwemer, rational to the bitter end, denied any of this. They wrote the rebellion off as a failure of numbers, as an engineering flaw in slave retention. They adjusted algorithms, created new automata, but their writings grew more frantic, more erratic. Engineers stopped reporting. Some vanished. Others were found whispering in their sleep, drawing spiral glyphs with bloodied fingers. The Deepened were not just victims. They were vectors, vessels, and what they carried was not just pain. It was prophecy, perhaps, or penance. It spread across the lower chambers of Blackreach, and then deeper still, into tunnels the Dwemer had sealed generations ago, into wells filled with old poison and older stone. The Deepened began to gather in these places, not by command, not by design, by instinct. They didn't speak, yet somehow knew. And there, in those suffocating voids, they began to change again. Not visibly, but spiritually. Something unseen took root in them. The glyphs changed shape. The humming grew louder. The rhythms became rituals. They stacked bones in patterns, marked walls with spiral suns, danced, sometimes, though none who watched lived long to describe it. They no longer needed orders. They had purpose now. The Falmer rebellion died a slow death. Not from the Dwemer, but from within. The lines blurred. Who was free? Who was lost? Who had seen too much? It wasn't just the Deepened who changed. The survivors, too, began to carry pieces of the same madness. Some heard the humming in their dreams. Others followed the Deepened into tunnels and never returned. The curse had become a culture. It was no longer enough to fight. They were too far gone. Those who remained told stories to remember. Not to win, there was no winning now, but to preserve. To hold on to what little identity still burned in their blood. Some clung to old snow blessings, to songs from the surface. Others whispered the names of their ancestors each night, like armor. And still, the deepened multiplied. Their numbers unknown, their purpose unclear, but they moved with unity, not bound by rage, nor grief, but by a will that had nothing to do with the Falmer, or the Dwemer, or even Nirn. The tunnels had eyes now, not ones that saw, but ones that knew, and the deepened watched from within them, waiting. It did not begin with a roar or a quake. The end of the Dwemer came in silence. One moment they were there, countless, methodical, God-chasing in their ambition, and the next, the deep places were empty of their golden masters. No warning, no sign, just absence, as if Nur herself had exhaled and taken them with her. The Falmer did not understand at first. They only noticed the changes. The chittering of constructs no longer echoed in the long halls. Patrols vanished. The cruel masters who had once been everywhere were now nowhere. The great glowing machines still hummed, but untended. Tonal forges crackled aimlessly. Traps did not reset, and the gates, once so tightly sealed, were open. At first, it felt like a trick. The Falmer huddled in silence, waiting for the inevitable punishment, for the gears to grind again, for the experiments to resume. But nothing came. Days passed, then weeks, and the Dwemer remained gone. What was left behind was not peace. It was confusion, like a house abandoned in haste. The deep city was littered with signs of a people who had simply disappeared mid-step. Half-written formulae on brass slates. Unfinished automatons frozen in posture. Meals laid out on long metallic tables, now cold and dusted. Some among the Falmer said it was the gods' justice, that the Dwemer had finally paid for their arrogance. Others whispered that the Dwemer had found what they sought, a path to godhood so perfect they left their bodies behind. But no one knew. No scholar, no seer, no surviving Dwemer journal could explain what had truly happened. And for the Falmer, there was no celebration. There was only inheritance. Blackreach, that yawning, terrifying wound beneath Skyrim, now belonged to the blind. The endless towers, the glowing mushrooms, the sky of stone pierced with stars of steam and glowing crystal. The very halls where they had once screamed were now silent. But not for long. The deepened still roamed. The absence of the Dwemer did not undo the curse. The machines that altered them were gone, yes, but the damage remained. And deeper still, the chorus they had begun to follow only grew louder. Without Dwemer interference, the glyphs spread faster. Rituals grew stranger. In the vacuum left behind, the Falmer changed again. Some tried to rebuild, to find purpose. They explored the vacant laboratories and temples, deciphered what little they could. But Dwemer knowledge was cold and cruel. Nothing there could reverse what had been done. There were no cures, no way back. And others, the deepened especially, didn't want to go back. They thrived in the silence. They claimed the Dwemer halls as sacred places now, not prisons. They carved new symbols into brass and stone. They sang their own songs, jagged and piercing. Their hives multiplied. New leaders emerged, shamans of blood and whisper, who claimed to understand the humming. There were many who resisted them at first. Among the Falmer, a faction known as the Severian, meaning remembrance bearers, rose. They spoke of a return to the surface, of rediscovering their ancient kin. They held on to myths of sunlight and snow, kept scrolls of memory and names of lineages long dead. But they were few, and the deepened were many. A war erupted, not like those above, not with armies and siege engines. This was a quiet war, fought in lightless caves with poisoned darts and soundless blades. The Severian used knowledge and stealth. The deepened used ritual and madness. Some say the Severian nearly succeeded, that they reached the threshold of the surface, breathed air that had not touched stone, that they saw the stars, real stars, once more. But whether they were struck down before escaping, or chose to remain and try to save their kin, none can say. Their texts were lost, or taken. Over time, their name faded. The deepened erased what remained. They carved over the memory with spirals. Their own histories replaced truth. Their shamans began telling a different story, that they were the true Falmer now, that the curse was not a wound, but an evolution, that blindness was not a defect, but a blessing. They became the keepers of the deep, and the silence of the Dwemer halls was broken, not by gears and machines, but by the shuffling of pale feet, the scratching of claws on stone, and the low hum of many voices chanting in forgotten tongues. They built nothing new. They repurposed. They twisted. And as centuries passed, their numbers grew. Generations were born in darkness, raised with no knowledge of the surface, of gods, of the world above. Only tunnels, hunger, war, and the chorus, the unseen force that spoke through dreams and echoed in dripping caverns. The deepened claimed they understood it now, that it was the voice of something ancient, not Daedra, not Edra, but other, a force that welcomed the broken, that whispered to the blind. Some began to call it No-Eye, a name given not out of fear, but reverence. No-Eye did not command. It lured. It pulsed in their minds like memory. It sang. And in the ruins of stone, in the halls once filled with gold, the Falmer gathered and listened. They were no longer waiting for rescue or restoration. They were becoming something new. In the black belly of Nirn, beneath layers of history, betrayal, and stone, the Falmer began to listen to a voice that had no source, no tongue, no shape. It was simply there, like the sound of one's own breath or the silence behind all things. They came to call it No-Eye. No-Eye had no shrine, no temple, no avatar carved in rock or myth. Its presence was not announced by thunder, nor did it demand sacrifice in the way mortals understood. Instead, it was felt like the shifting pressure before an earthquake or the hush before a scream. It began in dreams. The deepened Falmer were the first to claim they had heard it. The elders, wrapped in layers of tattered chitin and fungus, would murmur tales of visions not bound by sight. They spoke of warmth and drowning, of vast shapes behind the world, unseen but aware. The voice behind the stone, they called it, the hunger in the void, and always the whisper that teaches. Unlike the Dwemer gods, cold, mechanical, impossible, No-Eye was intimate. It touched the mind gently, curling around thought. It did not teach in riddles or formulas. It coiled itself through belief, tightening until there was no room for anything else. What did it say? They never agreed. Some claimed it sang to them in the voices of the long dead. Others said it made them remember things they had never lived. A forest of white trees, snow that never melted, a city of glass where elves once sang. But none could tell if these were true memories or gifts of suggestion. The few surface scholars who have pieced together scraps of Falmeri ritual describe something disturbing. That the deeper the Falmer ventured into their own mind, in trance, in hunger, in darkness, the closer they felt to No-Eye. It rewarded them not with knowledge, but with unknowing. For what is blindness but the removal of false light? And that became their holy dogma. Sight is the lie. Light is the mask. Truth is in the dark. With this doctrine, the Falmer began to shape themselves around the voice. Their rituals became more alien. The shamans of the Deepened took on new names: echo bearers, mind splitters, veil weavers. They adorned their bodies with cuts and glyphs etched into flesh, not for pain, but to open new listening doors upon their skin. A new generation of Falmer was born into these practices. They did not remember the surface. They did not know snow, or stars, or speech beyond clicks and murmurs. Their entire world was constructed by the rhythms of No-Eye. Their caves became wombs of sound. Each stone tunnel was tuned. Bones hung from ceilings to rattle, just so. Pools of phosphorescent fungus were arranged into sigils visible only through other senses: smell, heat, echo. Every inch of their layers was designed to carry the whispers further. But there were still some who remembered, faintly, like the taste of a dream. These were the youngest Deepened, born between madness and myth, who sometimes felt the call of another world. A breeze through a crack in stone, the scent of pine, the sense that something else existed beyond the voice. These few often vanished, taken by the shamans, some say, purged before doubt could spread. Others say they followed the cracks and escaped, that somewhere, wandering Skyrim's frozen heights, a handful of Falmerborn carry the last true memories of their people. But those are tales whispered by Nords to frighten children. What is undeniable is this: No-Eye became God. Not in name, not in text, but in function. The Falmer no longer questioned who cursed them. They no longer searched for healing or revenge. Their suffering had been transmuted by years, by trauma, and by the whisper into faith. And that is the truest curse of all. For in the beginning, the Dwemer poisoned their bodies. But in the end, no eye claimed their minds. What no eye truly is, no mortal scholar can confirm. Some speculate it is a Daedric prince, perhaps Namra, goddess of the void and the forgotten. Others suggest Hermias Mora, whispering lies to lead the blind into deeper madness. A more obscure theory points to Ifra corrupted, or a Sharmad echo, something left behind by Dagoth Yuar's descent into dreaming. But many believe no eye is not a thing at all. Rather, it is a phenomenon, a spiritual echo created by centuries of pain, desperation, and isolation. A God-shaped hole that filled itself with belief. A self-generated delusion made real by worship. And why not? In the Elder Scrolls, belief is power. And the Falmer believe with a singular, terrible clarity. To them, no eye is not evil. It is freedom, a world without deception, a silence free of illusion. In the dark, they're never judged. In the dark, they are not broken, they are becoming. And so they continue, scraping tunnels deeper, drawing maps in blood, chanting words that no surface tongue can parse. They are not idle monsters lurking beneath ruins. They are pilgrims of a dark path. And every so often, when the wind shifts just right in the Blackreach caverns, you might hear something. A hum, a rhythm, not mechanical, not natural, but something in between. A whisper, not loud, not clear, but persistent. And if you listen too long, if you close your eyes and breathe it in, you might begin to understand why they follow. You might begin to hear no eye yourself. Time, it is said, wears away all things stone, memory, even sorrow. Deep beneath the mountains of Skyrim, the Falmer had not simply vanished from history. They had erased themselves from it. But such an act is never sudden. It is slow, like a root winding deeper into earth, losing all sense of sky. Once they had names for the moons. Once they held winter festivals beneath aurora-lit heavens. Once they had a language that carried the timbre of the wind through highland pines. But now all of it was mist, and mist had no weight in the mind. The Falmer of the deep no longer remembered what they had lost. And in forgetting, they had become unrecognizable, even to themselves. The few remaining stories passed among them were not of the surface, but of shadows. Not of forests, but of tunnels that led to deeper tunnels. In the echoes of their makeshift rituals, there were no songs of mourning, only rhythms of endurance, beats tapped on stone or bone to recall the shape of being. Among their kind, history was a foreign concept. Why should it matter where they came from, when all they had was the now, the stone walls, the fungus that fed them, the skittering of shores beneath their feet? Survival had replaced memory, and from that came a dangerous freedom. For a creature who forgets who it was can become anything. The young were born without language. Only gesture, posture, scent, and hum. Their vision long replaced by sharpened hearing, sensitivity to vibration, and an uncanny ability to navigate total blackness. The surface world, with its cruel light, its poisonous clarity, was a myth, told as warning rather than aspiration. Above is the realm of blindness, one Falmer priest had once hissed. The eyes of the world see only lies. Down here, we feel truth. Yet, even in their depths, there were echoes that could not be silenced. Some spaces, ancient Dwemer vaults, collapsed cities, retained ghostly remnants of another age. Broken statues of elven warriors, murals of starlit nights, great halls whose arches still bore the faint imprint of Falmeri craftsmanship, long overtaken by Dwemer metal and steam. To the Falmer children, these relics were not relics. They were meaningless. But to the old ones, the deep shamans, the memory holders, they were sacred wounds. Symbols of a betrayal too massive to name, too ancient to feel fresh, yet still pulsing beneath the surface of consciousness like a buried ember. Some of these elders would spend days touching the cold walls, whispering forgotten syllables to themselves, rocking gently, as if remembering was a pain they were afraid to fully awaken. Once we walked where stars walked, one whispered. Once we sang, but no songs remained. In their place, a silence had taken root. Not emptiness, but something louder than sound. A fullness of forgetting. A presence that filled the void of their former selves with a new shape. One molded not by choice, but by centuries of oppression and redefinition. The Falmer did not call themselves Falmer anymore. That name, Snow Elf, belonged to the light. They had taken on names that meant nothing to the surface. Carthlin, Third Oak, Olrak, terms grown from ritual, echo, and the patterns of Shore's feet in the soil. But even in their alien state, the Falmer had not become beasts. No matter how the surface world might paint them. As savages, monsters, blind abominations, they had not lost will. Nor culture. Their civilization had merely shifted, turned inward, downward, transformed by pain and darkness. Some might call it corruption. Others, evolution. The truth is more complex. They build in new ways. Not with timber or stone, but with scavenged metal, bone, and fungal resin. Their architecture became organic, web-like, nested and circular, mimicking the burrows of Shorus or the flow of subterranean air. Their homes breathed. Their paths were layered in scent markers, tactile carvings, and chime signals. Where once they wrote poems, now they etched pulse rhythms into cave walls. A language of beat and echo. Tap, pause, scrape. Not unlike music, not unlike thought. They were not static. They adapted. And in that adaptation, they achieved something their Dwemer overlords never foresaw. They survived, despite poison, despite blindness, despite centuries of being hunted, hated, and forgotten. The Falmer became a people of the in-between, neither of the light nor of total shadow. They were questioned no longer asked by the surface, but still answered every day below. And sometimes, rarely, but enough to be remembered, a few would climb toward the cracks. Not to escape, but to witness. These seekers had no interest in returning to a world that scorned them, but they would creep close to it, skulking ruins, listening to travelers, sometimes taking one, not out of malice, but curiosity. They studied the surface as if it were another species. And perhaps it was. For to the Falmer now, the surface dwellers were the aliens, the strange, sight-bound creatures who still believed light was truth and memory was sacred. They watched with cautious fascination, not envy. Occasionally, whispers would ripple through their hidden world, tales of the Dragonborn, of battles fought above where the sky still bled fire. These stories intrigued them, not for politics or prophecy, but for what they revealed. The surface world still trembled, still changed. But the Falmer, they endured. No longer Falmer, no longer elves. They had become something else, something neither snow nor night, something born of loss but grown in silence. The surface had forgotten them, but they, too, had forgotten the surface. And perhaps that was the deepest tragedy of all. Not war, not betrayal, not even the blinding, but the quiet, final shedding of everything that once was. Still deep in the oldest caverns, where time runs differently and light dares not enter, one might find a single, surviving symbol carved in ancient Elvish. Its meaning barely remembered. But if you trace your hand along it slowly and close your eyes, you might hear the faintest echo of what it once meant. Snow. The Falmer no longer sang as their ancestors did. No choirs in mountain temples. No flutes played under silver moons. No hymns to gods long dead or forgotten. Yet in the deep, among fungal groves and echoing tunnels, a different kind of music had emerged. One not of joy, nor of beauty, but of survival. A raw, resonant rhythm that pulsed through the caverns like the slow heartbeat of the earth itself. They did not call it music. To call it music would be to compare it to what came before. And what came before had faded into the unreachable. Instead, they called it Kralvek, the sound of presence. This was how the blind navigated. This was how the forgotten remembered. A Falmer child would learn the Kralvek before they even understood direction or clan. Tapping fingers on stone, feeling echoes in their jawbones, mimicking the cadence of Shorus wings or the tremor of distant lava flows. To listen was to live. To echo was to belong. Each chamber of their cavernous society had a signature tone, low or high, fast or slow, and Falmer learned to differentiate space not by sight, but by sound imprint. Some caves sang with slow, mournful pulses. Others rattled with fast, skittering patterns, like insect limbs scratching in rhythm. In the center of the oldest cities, where the ancient Falmeri Dwemer ruins still stood, the shamans would conduct great resonant rites. Not with instruments, but with coordinated stomps, strikes, and calls. Dozens of Falmer would gather, moving as one, their bodies like tuning forks, vibrating the stone, sending coded messages through miles of rock. These rituals were spiritual, but also practical. Through them, messages were passed between distant clans. A collapse in the southern tunnels. A Shora's queen nearing her molt. A warning of Nords hunting above. But there were also deeper meanings in these songs, meaning few could articulate, even to one another. The elders spoke of the stone memory, a belief that the earth itself held echoes of all things, pain, joy, betrayal, resilience, and that through Kral Vek, one could access it. To strike the stone in the right rhythm was to recall what once was. A kind of echo divination, a communion with the deep. And there were those, even among the Falmer, who believed the old songs still lived, not in form, but in frequency. Hidden beneath the growls of Shoras and the hiss of steam vents, the echoes of Snow Elf hymns might still hum, buried under centuries of loss. One such shaman, known only as Ulvir, was revered for his uncanny ability to recreate these ancient tones. It was said that when he tapped his staff on Dwemer tiles, the stones would remember, singing notes not heard since the days of the surface. When he passed through a chamber, it was like the past stirred. The walls thrummed. The air tingled. Some whispered that Ulvir had once touched a relic, a piece of ancient Falmeri architecture untouched by the Dwemer, and that it had spoken to him in dreams. Others believed he was born during a rare confluence of subterranean forces, when the ground itself quaked with ancestral memory. Whatever the truth, his followers were many. He taught that forgetting was not erasure, that even the blind could see the past, not with eyes, but with intention. Through rhythm, through resonance, through belief. Memory is not light, he said once during a rite. It is vibration. The world hums with what we've lost. And so, under Ulvir's guidance, a new generation of Falmer began to listen more deeply, to carve their dwellings with channels that captured and prolonged sound, to tune bone chimes to the frequencies of their oldest temples, to record lineage not with names, but with sequences of knocks and thumps, encoded beats passed from parent to child. Through this, they created ancestral songs, not traditional melodies, but complex sequences of vibration, representing entire lifetimes. A shaman might thump the floor with a stone for 20 minutes straight. Each pause, each rhythm change marking a new story, a new ancestor. These were living echoes, legacies not written, but performed. Sometimes, in silence, a Falmer mother would sit beside her young and place their hand on her chest. Then, humming at a low, inaudible pitch, she'd share a story through the resonance of her bones. It was not spoken, it was felt. Even so, not all Falmer embraced this slow awakening. Some remained locked in survival, their lives too consumed by Shora's tending, fungus cultivation, or clan feuds to bother with echoes. Others distrusted the shamans, seeing them as relics of a time best left buried. But even the skeptics could not deny the growing transformation, a quiet resurgence of identity in the depths. For the first time in centuries, small groups began to name their clans with ancient Falmeri syllables, distorted but recognizable. Terms like Nirval and Thalirith reappeared, spoken in the old tongue, even if only in ritual. In the farthest reaches of their caverns, isolated from even their own kind, some Falmer carved murals again, not as art, but as sound guides, each groove representing a rhythm pattern. A traveler could place their fingers along the design and follow its shape like a musician tracing a song. They were reclaiming something, not restoring the past. That was gone, long beyond repair, but rooting the present in rhythm, in vibration, in memory of memory. The Falmer, the forgotten, were composing themselves anew, and above them, the surface world remained largely unaware. To a Nord stumbling into a forgotten ruin, the Falmer were beasts. To an adventurer, They were fodder, faceless foes in the dark. Even to scholars, they were curiosities reduced to footnotes in dusty tomes. But below, under mountain and myth, a people once lost were becoming again. Quietly, deeply, unseen, and their songs, strange, wordless, haunting, continued to reverberate. Through stone, through time, waiting. There comes a time in every long shadow when it touches something real, when the shape of what once was must pass across the face of what now is. In the endless caverns of Skyrim, that time arrived when the paths of the Falmer and the surface world, separated by centuries of fear and forgetting, began to overlap once more. But this meeting was not a moment of reunion. It was a collision of ghosts, each side haunted by a history too deep for memory. Among the Nords, the name Snow Elf had become myth. A race of pale-skinned spirits from forgotten days, now buried under the weight of dragon wars, Dwemer myths, and the dominion of the Septim Empire. The word Falmer was still known, but whispered only in fear as a name for the eyeless horrors said to stalk deep ruins and kill without warning. Few believed they were once the same, but the Falmer remembered, if not in words, then in rhythm, in pain, and in the soundless cries etched into their bones. It began with a scholar named Minthril, an altmare from Alinar who had long studied the ancient histories of Tamriel. She arrived in Skyrim seeking Dwemer ruins, hoping to uncover forgotten technology. But what she found, deep in a ruin called Nalmorith, was not just metal and stone. She found signs of life, not the clanking automatons she expected, not the detritus of bandit scavengers, but delicate carvings, subtle, almost imperceptible, embedded in the corners of a vast chamber. Grooves etched into stone not by machine, but by hand. She traced the lines with her fingertips and felt vibration. Minthril was no stranger to ancient languages. She had studied tonal architecture, Dwemer schematics, even Alien glyphs. But this was different. These carvings weren't language as she knew it. They were resonance maps. Echo charts. She began tapping the grooves, listening. The patterns produced harmonies that hummed low in her bones. She recorded them. She returned. She listened again. And then the Falmer came. She didn't see them at first, only felt them. Watched shadows shift, air thicken, the distinct hush of a place aware of being watched. But they didn't attack. Instead, they listened. And so did she. Night after night, she tapped out the grooves in the stone. She mimicked their tones, guessed at meanings. Eventually, a single Falmer stepped forward. He did not speak, but when she finished her tone, he added his own, an answering rhythm. They stood in silence. Echo met echo. Memory met memory. Mithra would later call this moment the meeting of shadows. She returned to the surface changed, haunted by what she had witnessed. In her journals, she wrote not just of ruins, but of people, a lost culture who had never truly died, only shifted. She proposed that the Falmer retain memories not through books or speech, but through resonance. That in their music, there was lineage. In their rhythm, history. She was ridiculed. Scholars dismissed her theories. The Mages Guild labeled it speculation. Some called her deluded. Others said she had been tricked by Dwemer remnants. Her findings were archived, forgotten. Her warnings ignored. But she was not wrong. The Falmer remembered. And now, so too did one soul above the surface. In the years that followed, whispers of her work spread quietly. A few fringe scholars began to re-examine the Falmer not as monsters, but as survivors. Some even traveled into the ruins themselves, cautiously, respectfully, bringing with them instruments, rhythm tools, and humility. Many did not return, but a few did. They told of distant echoes answered. A Falmer who stood at a distance, listening. Some scholars even reported shared resonance rituals, short moments of communion without words. They were not alliances, nor friendships, but they were something. In one account, a scholar named Aaron Tao, a Redguard tonal theorist, described being encircled by 5 Falmer who responded to his rhythmic chant with synchronized steps. For 15 minutes, they moved in a perfect loop, mirroring his cadence. Then they dispersed, leaving behind a single stone etched with a resonance pattern. The message was unclear, but the intent was unmistakable. We are not gone. And still, on the surface, ignorance prevailed. Most saw the Falmer as enemies, nuisances to be cleared from ruins and tombs. Adventurers hunted them. Nobles denied their existence. Stories of peaceful contact were dismissed as fanciful dreams. But cracks had begun to form. In Winterhold, an enclave of tonal alchemists began creating instruments that could mimic Falmer rhythms, long pipes tuned to deep subterranean pitches. In Markarth, a group of miners claimed to have heard singing stones after a cave-in and were spared by nearby Falmer when they played a simple tone. It was not understanding, but it was recognition. And deep beneath it all, the Falmer watched. They did not hope, not in the surface sense. But some remembered the shimmer of light on snow. Some remembered temples, names, songs. In their echo caves, shamans began modifying their resonance maps, adding patterns mimicked from surface rhythms. Not to submit, not to change, but to bridge. A new generation emerged, born into silence, but not shaped by fury. They were cautious, still scarred, still haunted. But where once their only rhythm had been war, now there was curiosity. And in the deep, in chambers older than empires, they sang, not with voices but with stone. In the hollow deep of Nirn's forgotten places, where sunless echoes stretch longer than time itself, something began to stir. Not a cry, not a shout, but a tone. Low, patient, deliberate. Not sung with mouths, but coaxed from stone. This was how the Falmer remembered. And now, slowly, it became how they began to be seen again. The tones, their oldest form of record, held more than memory. They were how history breathed among the blind. Long after voices were stolen and language turned alien, the Falmer shaped their stories through resonance, mapping grief, triumph, betrayal, and survival into tones that pulsed through stone like whispers through marrow. As surface dwellers finally started to listen, truly listen, the world changed in tiny, echoing ways. In a newly established resonance enclave of Dunmeth, built within a disused Dwemer shaft between Windhelm and the Velothai Mountains, a coalition of scholars, tonal alchemists, and historians gathered to study the language of resonance. Funded quietly by a branch of the College of Winterhold, the enclave became the first semi-official effort to decode Falmer history on their own terms, rather than through broken legends or second-hand myths. In this dim-lit place of respect, tones were no longer mimicked or guessed. They were learned, practiced, and exchanged. The scholars crafted great tone tables, stone plates lined with grooves based on Falmer etchings. Tapping, rubbing, or striking the plates created the deep, haunting vibrations the Falmer used to speak across generations. Then one evening, something extraordinary happened. While practicing a tonal sequence found deep in a ruin near Erkingthand, one of the apprentices, an Argonian named Selkaretali, altered the final rhythm ever so slightly. A different cadence, an offbeat pause. And from the far side of the chamber, a tone answered. 3 notes, spaced evenly. Every scholar froze. No one was in that wing of the ruins. The tone came again. Tentatively, Selkaretali tapped a response. The tones exchange grew slower, more layered, building into a rhythmic dialogue, until finally, a Falmer stepped into the light. He wore no armor, no weapons. His face, like all Falmer, was sunken, featureless, pale as bleached ivory, but his body was relaxed, not poised for combat. He stepped forward, placed his hand upon the tone table, and tapped. 2 notes, an ancient rhythm. Then he withdrew. The message was unclear in words, but it resonated with meaning. A moment not of surrender, nor threat, but recognition. The moment was recorded in 7 tonal forms and studied endlessly. The scholars named the event the First Echo Accord. It marked the start of a new era, not a peace treaty in the traditional sense, but a tonal truce. A soft reaching toward what had always been feared. Outside the enclave, stories spread slowly. In Markarth, a group of tonal masons incorporated Falmer sequences into their mining alerts, hoping to ward off attacks by showing respect. In Blackreach, adventurers spoke of moments where Falmer patrols simply passed by, ignoring them if no threat was posed. The surface did not become safe, but became less hostile. And deeper underground, the Falmer responded in kind. In caverns once hollowed by Dwemer cruelty, Shamans now etched new resonance maps, sequences that referenced surface rhythms, sometimes blending ancient Snow Elf hymns with tones they had heard above. Their tonal memory was evolving, becoming not just a vessel of survival, but a bridge of cautious understanding. A Falmer elder known only as Cuthranville, his name translated through years of tonal patterning, was said to have taught an entire generation of Falmer younglings a hybrid rhythm. It included the 4-tone morning hymn of the Snow Elves, once lost, and a 5th tone now called the listening note, which had no origin in Falmer history. It came from a surface melody. Even so, the damage was not undone. The cruelty of the Dwemer, the betrayal by kin, the blindness, none of it was forgotten. The Falmer still bore the weight of suffering so long and so silent that even time struggled to grasp it. But amidst all this pain, they endured, and that endurance began to be honored. In Windhelm, a statue was quietly commissioned by a group of Dwemer and Nords who had studied the resonance accords. It did not depict a specific Falmer or scholar. Instead, it was an abstract sculpture, stone-shaped in rhythmic arcs, each line echoing a tonal curve. Beneath it, a plaque bore only one word in Dwemer and Snow Elvish tones: remember. And the tones did remember. Each vibration, each sequence of rhythm passed through the Falmer became a new chapter in a story once thought lost to horror. The silence had become a language, and now, finally, others were beginning to listen. The Falmer still did not speak with words, but their stories sang. Beneath the stone, the vibrations moved. Beneath the fear, understanding stirred. In the dark, where so much had been taken, the Falmer began to give something back. Not trust, not yet, but a chance. A single tone in the dark, and somewhere above, someone was listening. In the coldest hours of the deepest night, before dawn can grace even the tallest peaks of Skyrim, there are echoes, soft, old, and burdened with memory. The Falmer dwell in this space between night and morning, where time has not yet decided whether to begin anew or to continue its quiet suffering. These echoes are not merely sounds in the dark. They are remnants of a once golden people, fragments of snowborn pride, lost to blindness and betrayal. And yet, they remain. They always remained. While kingdoms rose and fell, while empires declared victory and disappeared into dust, the Falmer endured, scarred, twisted, but enduring nonetheless. The final century of the Fourth Era brings no great peace to the Falmer. Their presence remains a shadowed one, elusive and mysterious. But in small places, on the edges of memory and myth, something begins to change. Something begins to stir. The tonal exchanges of Dunmeth Enclave, initiated in the chapter prior, continue to ripple outward. Through tonal historians and quiet ambassadors, tales are carried of Falmer who respond to rhythms, who resist violence when met with respect. These stories are rare and often dismissed as fantasy, but they grow in number. And in Blackreach, a group of tonal engineers from Cogrenzel begin the most daring experiment of all, the Harmony Chamber. Using recovered tonal schematics from Dwemer ruins and patterns recorded from Falmer enclaves, these engineers craft a stone chamber lined with echo beds and tonal resonators. The purpose is simple: to create a neutral ground, one not of words, but of tone. A place where resonance could occur without fear of misunderstanding. On the night the Harmony Chamber is activated, no one truly expects anything. The scholars prepare their tones, the deep bass of greeting, the 4 notes of mourning, and a 5th tone, newly invented, a tone of invitation. Hours pass in stillness. Then, in the blackest hour, the echoes answer. The Falmer arrive not as a horde, nor as individuals, but as shapes cloaked in silence. Their white skin gleams like old bone under the low resonance lights, and they move not as predators, but as pilgrims. They enter the chamber, place hands upon the tone walls, and respond. Not with human understanding, not with apology or desire, but with acknowledgement. One tone, mournful, then a cluster, measured, resonant. It is the ancient lament of the Snow Elves, not heard in living memory. The scholars, unsure of what they've accomplished, simply listen. And in that moment, it is enough. Above ground, the world continues its path toward further uncertainty. The Empire still teeters. The Dominion plots. Dragons return to the sky. But here, in this chamber beneath the world, Something old and broken tries to mend itself. Not in haste, not in hope, but in rhythm. And as the age prepares to turn, historians of all races begin to revise their records. The Falmer are no longer dismissed as betrayed savages or corrupted remnants. A few texts, bold and still contested, refer to them now as the unseen heirs of snow, the silent kin, the resident ones. But titles matter little to the Falmer. For them, the past is still carried in tone, not in ink. Among the oldest of their hidden enclaves, a new tradition is formed, the Dawn Chorus. Just before the surface sun begins to rise, Falmer shamans gather their kin, and together, they play a tonal rhythm using the stonework of their dwellings, quiet, almost imperceptible vibrations. It is not a ritual of worship or mourning, but one of remembrance. These rhythms are never recorded, never repeated. They are sung once into the world and allowed to fade. But those who hear them, scholars, adventurers, or curious listeners near ruins, describe a strange sense of peace, as if the stone itself is humming with something older than grief. The Falmer are still broken in many ways. Their eyes will never return, and many among them remain hostile, trapped in endless cycles of fear and attack. But the curse of blindness no longer defines them entirely. It has become part of their truth, not their prison. In the final scrolls of the Harmony Chamber, written decades after its founding, one phrase is inscribed in both Dwemer and tonal Falmeri symbols. Where the eye cannot see, the soul may still hear. This line becomes a sort of motto among those who study the Falmer, a reminder that understanding is not always visual. That knowledge, like compassion, can be felt, not simply observed. And so, the Falmer continue. In the dark, in the stone, in the song of 1,000 echoes. The world may forget them again. Time has a way of erasing what is inconvenient or painful. But beneath the mountains, beneath the ruins, beneath the noise of history, the Falmer still sing. Not for us, not even for themselves, but because it is what remains. Because in the song, they are still whole. Because when the dawn comes, they will still be there, waiting, listening. In the deep silence that follows the last echo of the dawn chorus, the stone itself seems to exhale. Blackreach, that ancient cavern of lightless wonder, holds its breath, not in fear, but in reverence. Somewhere, high above where the sunlight walks, the world awakens, unaware that far below, a story has come full circle. A song has been sung. A curse is softened. The Falmer endure. They do not rise to reclaim empires, nor do they emerge in force to demand recognition. There are no sweeping proclamations, no redemption inscribed upon banners. Their resurgence, if it can be called that, is something quieter, a reknitting of soul and rhythm, a healing that echoes not through courts and councils, but through tunnels and stone. The Harmony Chamber remains active, though its attendance wanes. In the beginning, it drew scholars and tonal architects, adventurers seeking to witness the impossible, peace with the betrayed. But as time passed, and the miracle became mundane, fewer came. The novelty faded. The world above moved on. Yet the chamber still sings. At dawn and dusk, the stone hums with memory. Not every day, not in the same key, but often enough that those who remain, caretakers and kin, learn to wait with patience and listen with reverence. The Falmer do not always come. Sometimes they do not respond for weeks or seasons. But then, without warning, they arrive. And in tones soft as fog, they sing to the stone. These tonal exchanges are never translated, never dissected. That is their power. No mage has broken their structure. No historian has fully understood the meaning. And yet, even the untrained feel something in those sounds, a sense of mourning, of love, of terrible loss and fragile hope. In one particular session, recorded briefly by a tonal apprentice and since lost to fire, the Falmer introduced a new rhythm. Not a lament, but a song of light. Soft, almost inaudible, vibrating at such a low register it caused nearby crystals to glow faintly blue. The apprentice called it the song that sees without seeing. No one knows what it means, but it is beautiful. Elsewhere in Tamriel, rumors persist of white-skinned figures glimpsed on mountaintops, of strange vibrations near old ruins, of blind shapes who pass silently through moonlit forests without harming a soul. Some are terrified. others curious. Few believe, but in a quiet corner of the College of Winterhold, a small chamber has been built, carved into the rock beneath the Hall of Attainment. It contains no books, no scrolls, only a single Dwemer resonator, tuned to a frequency no human ear can hear. A Falmer chime rests beside it, gifted anonymously. Students are instructed to sit in silence. Nothing more. Some are turn-changed. The true legacy of the Falmer is not one of tragedy alone, nor of revenge avoided. It is the legacy of being unseen, yet real. Of being remembered not in tales of wrath, but in songs that hum through stone, unheard but felt. And within their ancient cities, long buried and long broken, the Falmer build. Not as the Dwemer built, great engines of ambition and power, but softly, humbly. They carve circles into rock. They shape arches from ice and chimes from fallen crystal. They place no banners. They speak no names. But the song grows. It is sung not in words, but in vibration, passed through roots and rock and silence. Some say the Nerevarine once heard this song in dreams. Some say that Snow Prince's spirit hums along in Sovngarde. Who can know? The truth in Tamriel is never fixed. It shifts like snow in a warm hand. But what we know is this. The Falmer are no longer only the betrayed. They are survivors. They are rhythm. They are memory carved in cold. And in one hidden enclave, beneath a mountain whose name is lost to time, a young Falmer reaches out to touch a wall. Their hand vibrates gently as they play a single, perfect note. The note echoes. It is not answered. Not yet. But in the deep quiet, the Falmer waits. And the stone listens. The story ends not with resolution, but with resonance. Not with light returning to blind eyes, but with music returning to forgotten hearts. It is not justice. It is not glory. It is not even redemption. It is simply what remains. A song left in stone. And it is enough.